Hey everybody, I'm Jake Morris. I'm the instructor for class this semester, crime prevention. If you're not in crime prevention, email me immediately, or if you didn't think you were, because apparently you are. This is an online course, so I hope to be able to augment some of the teachings, the learnings that you guys get from the book and from the assignments, and from some of the extras by being able to uh, provide a short YouTube video for each week. We obviously cover a lot. It's a 6 week course, so we're not going to have time to make a full lecture and record it and put it on here. This is just meant to maybe hit on some of the things in a general way that are meant or that tend to confuse students who are trying to grasp these topics. Um, and again, like I said, not all of us are kind of book learners. So again, oftentimes two things combined together with a little bit of a lecture or a little bit of an explanation, probably a more accurate way to say it, and the book material. So number one, you all have to read though. You got to read this book. This is an important uh, topic, and with so little time, we're trying to jam pack a lot of stuff in here. I didn't even get through the entire book with the 6 week course just because it's really not fair. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. Uh, good luck. So I would rather focus on the quality. Make sure that you guys leave this class with a good understanding and a solid understanding of a lot of the things that uh, the study of crime prevention can provide. And then if you feel the need to, certainly delve in a little bit deeper. Um, but again, we're not going to blow through the book just so that we can say we blew through the book and not get all the important details down. So with that being said, I'm like I said, I'm going to try to do maybe a 15-minute to a half-hour video every week, just hitting on some of the major key points in our assigned reading. Um, and yeah, if there's any questions, I'll always be on Zoom every Wednesday. Again, send me a message. If you can't make the Zoom, it's no harm, no foul. It's just another way that I'm trying to kind of take the negatives of an online course out of this course. So by being accessible to you once a week, if you can make it, awesome. You don't have to stay for the whole meeting. If there's something you wanted to ask and then get out, that's cool too. But like I said, hopefully between the kind of introduction video and the reading, the supplemental materials, and then the Zoom meeting, you get hopefully more than you've ever gotten out of an online class. But again, anything more, message me. We'll set something up one-on-one. So with that being said, let's jump into week two. I didn't do one of these in week one because it's the introduction week. There is one chapter, and it's pretty short. The chapters in this book are kind of short, which is good because again, quality over quantity. Um, as we start this week, obviously we are here in week two, which is public health and the study of crime prevention. We're going to cover chapters 2 and 3. Like I said, I'm kind of going to hit on the main points. Obviously, as college students, this is probably not a secret, but you know that when you cover the chapter outline at the beginning, right here, you can see what we're going to be talking about. This is not meant to be a cheater type of deal. This is meant to say, hey, this is what we're trying to cover. Often knowing what we're trying to cover before we cover it will help you be a little more receptive and hopefully help it stick, help you key in and focus in on some of these main ideas and the major ideas with our weekly reading. So for this week, we're really kind of getting into still the setup of the actual practice of crime prevention. And what we're doing is we're building an understanding. So in week one, we built an understanding of really almost like what crime is. We talked about the crime triangle, which you all did a great job. I'm grading the discussion posts now and the responses. Um, but we talked about the crime triangle. The idea, one thing I did notice that some of you kind of, I don't want to say you made a mistake because you weren't necessarily wrong, but when you're thinking about crime, and especially in the crime triangle, that's an important idea to understand with regards to crime prevention, that crime triangle. And it's important to note that when you're identifying the place, it's not simply the place where the crime occurred. It's often why did the crime occur at that place. So when we talk about obviously the motivated offender, the target, right? So here we go. Um, that's one half of my triangle, or two-thirds of my triangle. And then that third one is the place. Okay. Um, sorry, I'm not much of a geometry major. Uh, but the idea is that place is special or was chosen for a reason. So how come police departments don't get robbed? When we talk about the crime of robbery, why don't police departments get robbed? Well, there's usually a ton of armed people there who are in charge of catching robbers, right? That'd be a horrible place to try to commit a robbery. Also, there's not much money there and this, that, and the other. But if there were, it'd be a terrible place to rob, right? You're gonna get caught. There's probably a camera. There's probably some officers there. So police departments don't get robbed. But why do liquor stores get robbed? Well, they're typically in an area where you don't have officers. This is why we staff officers in Moraine. We staff an officer at a liquor store because there's usually a high cash flow there. All right, so you have your target. Um, you have your motivated offender who's just a robber, or whatever the motivations of that robber may be. And again, your place would be a liquor store. I can get in, I can get out. It's a small store. I know everybody that's in there, or I can see everyone that's in there. These are things that make it appealing for someone to want to commit a crime. Now, how do we mitigate that? When we talk about crime prevention, we talk about doing things like adding video cameras, putting a big orange, bright orange sign at the door that says, there are 100 video cameras in this store. You're going to get caught if you do anything shady. Don't. Maybe having the officer stand right by that front door. So, bam, as soon as you walk in, you're seeing some guy or girl in uniform, which makes this not a good idea to rob this store. What does that do? That robber who was thinking about robbing that store is now thinking, you know what? Maybe I'll rob the store on the other side of the city or down the road a little bit. So remember, it's not just where the crime took place. It's more about the reason the crime took place. Typically, when we consider that, we consider a lack of supervision. Supervision can be a video camera. It can be a nosy neighbor, which are great sometimes, or it can be, officers patrolling the area. But again, it's not just, hey, the street was the place. No, it's a dark street with no street lights and an abandoned dead end development road, and the car was parked there in the dark, right by the woods. So that's pretty inviting for a car thief or for someone that's going to steal out of a car. And that is what makes that unique, because when we get fast forward ahead to the addressing of that, we start to say, well, let's add a street light. And you know what? Let's get some coppers to go through there 2 or 3 times during their shift at random times to make it a little uncomfortable. And oh, by the way, park this in front of your front picture window, your living room window. So now all of a sudden, these people that would want to steal from the car have to worry about, boy, is there a cop coming? Everybody can see me, and man, I'm right in front of this family's picture window. If they peek out here and see me nosing through their car, I'm going to be in big trouble. So that's how we try to address the crime. We try to take away that lack of supervision and make that place not very appealing. So again, that's the understanding of I guess, the real basic understanding of crime prevention. We're going to get obviously a lot deeper into that, and you guys all did a great job. But as we move now into week 2, chapters 2 and 3, we're starting to set up a little more of a specific academic understanding of crime prevention and some of the approaches that we take, some of the things that we look at to determine what we what one of those crime triangle elements we try to take away. So if you follow along with me here, now I have my physical book here. This what I have on the screen here is simply just so you can follow along. But all my highlights and stuff are in the physical book. So if I look down, sorry. But again, public health and the study of crime prevention, right? Chapter 2. We're not going to go through this piece by piece, but what I do want to help you understand is that public health, the public health motto here, which is displayed on your screen, these are important ideas to know. This doesn't necessarily even completely have to do with crime prevention. The public health model is like a holistic thing that really determines the health of the public. Clever name, right? Um, it's meant to say, hey, what is hurting our public? And crime is one of those things, but there's also things like health, lead in water, um, disease, homelessness. These are like social or societal factors that can really add to uh, the public health idea or take away from it, I suppose. And because of that, crime is also one of them. Why people commit crime, how often they commit crime. So this this is as we begin to really hone in on what this course is about. It's pretty important that we consider that. As you'll see here in chapter 2, this public health in big bold letters, which thankfully that always helped me out when I was a student. But the big bold letters there that say public health are giving you an idea on what it is. It's the need to prevent disease, illness, injury, and also, crime. I don't know, can't believe they left that one out there, being that this is a crime book. Anyway, this is actually a pretty good book. I read 2 or 3 of these books, and this was by far the best. But yeah, so public health, as far as at least we're concerned, we're going to start looking at how to make the public healthier through crime prevention. But in order to do that, we need to understand some of the causes of crime and some of the effects of crime. So harm reduction, right? That's really what we're talking about when we say that we want to reduce the effects of crime. We want to reduce, a crime is a harm, whether it's a harm to society or a harm to another person. So robbery, right? Robbery is when I know there's some coppers in my class here, but let's just keep it simple, okay? An example of robbery could be punching somebody, knocking them down, and taking their wallet out of their pocket and running away, okay? That'd be a robbery. The harm is obviously to that person, okay? But in other things like, say, a drunk driver, the harm is to society. Because even if that drunk driver doesn't hurt somebody, places society at risk, and it is a harm to society as a whole, okay? So obviously if that drunk driver hits somebody and kills them, then there'd be a different crime. There'd be drunk driving and, depending on the state you live in, it could be, aggravated vehicular homicide or assault, manslaughter, things like that. There's a whole myriad of crimes that have to do with that, so we won't get into the woods. But the idea is you need to know that that's a different crime. That crime, say vehicular assault or aggravated vehicular manslaughter, would be a crime against the drunk driver to the people or person that he hurt or killed, whereas the act of drunk driving is a crime against society. So there are harms in both instances there, and as crime prevention personnel, we try to eliminate those harms, or at least understand what those harms are. Again, big bold letters here, harm reduction. I definitely recommend reading those. I want to be mindful of all your time because I know that this is an internet course, meaning that it's self-paced. But again, they get a little into the weeds here, like off the beaten path. We're here about crime prevention, and sometimes you do need to understand the supporting elements of what crime prevention is. However, they go way deep, man. They go into disease, they go into smoking, they go into lead and water, people who are pregnant that don't get the proper nutrition or use drugs and alcohol during pregnancy. These are all things that can, in fact, lead to crime because of a lack of development or developmental issues, excuse me. Smoking and the sickness is caused by smoking. Those are harm. But let's just keep it simple here. It's important that you understand that harm covers more than crime, but let's just stay focused on crime for this class. Public health and crime prevention. It's a short area of our book, and basically they're just kind of letting you know that crime causes harm, and it causes harm. It's a very great source of this harm. We look at crime in the 1980s, 1970s, and then we look at how things progress through all the way up until today. but it's letting you know that, hey, man, maybe crime is something that we should look at and say, this is important enough to really focus on as a matter of public health, which is important because if it wasn't, we shouldn't be having a whole class on crime prevention. All right, but it is, and we do. So I digress. Uh, the three levels of public health and crime prevention. This is a little bit funky. I don't know that I necessarily fully agree with the author, but I see why they say this. Though there's primary, secondary, tertiary, all right, which basically means third, first, second, and third. Uh, Obviously, our primary prevention refers to, I'm going to just read it right out of the book because they did a good job on this one. It refers to preventing health problems altogether by addressing features of the social, physical, and natural environments that help generate these problems. So, I'm gonna add a little Jake spin on this now. Um, these are looking at some of these sources of crime causation, or crime origination is probably even a better word. Um, when you look at this, social causes. Do you live in an area where gangs are so prevalent that if you don't join a street gang, you can't really survive? Um, or if you don't join a street gang, you're constantly victimized. That would be a social cause of crime because now all of a sudden, being in a gang, maybe in like South Central LA or Chicago, uh, that's just a way of life. You just do it. It's part of growing up. The problem is obviously we can probably don't need an academic study to know that gangs are often involved in criminal acts. As such, that can normalize crime, introduce crime, and really set a young person on a path where, for the rest of their lives, they're without some sort of intervention, they're going to end up potentially being a part of that crime problem. Physical causes, what we're talking about there are a lot of like developmental problems, underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes, cognitive that affect cognition. Um, these are all things that it doesn't mean that like if you're born without five fingers, you're gonna be a criminal because you have four fingers on one hand. That's not what that's saying. That's essentially saying that if uh, if you are if you don't have the ability to really think about your actions, which often um, teenagers and adolescents don't think about their actions before they do it because their brains aren't fully developed. Um, and that means that sometimes they'll do things spontaneously or without thinking about the outcome. And yeah, we all want that BMW, right? They may jump in there and take it, not thinking, man, this could really screw me up down the road. But some people, because of substance abuse or just because of the way that they were born, never really get that development or have a severely underdeveloped portion of their minds that affects their brains that affects their decision making processes. So primary, and then obviously, lastly, we talk about natural environments. So again, if you grow up in Flint, Michigan, where water is still laden with lead, um, that can cause crime issues because of diseases that it causes, and again, malnourishment, things like that. Um, but your natural environment can cause a lot of health problems as well. Uh, so again, we're very lucky in the United States. I mean, if you grow up in some of the provinces in China that are extremely poverty ridden, they don't have health inspectors that say, hey, you need to clean that pan before you use it again. Um, and because of that, there can be some funky illnesses and things that affect people who don't have some of the luxuries that we have here in the United States. India, they have a caste system where a lot of people can grow up extremely extremely poor, and again they eat what they can get their hands on because they're quite frankly they're starving. So um, it's just a natural thing that we should be covering here as far as understanding the prevention approaches. That's one of the primaries. Okay, those are the three big ones that make up the primary prevention efforts. Secondary in public health, It refers to preventing health problems by focusing on many behaviors and practices that people are at greater risk. Look, long and short is if there's a poor school system or something along those lines, that kids are not being educated, and society said, we don't care. We're going to give all the money to Beverly Hills school system, and we're going to give zero money to Detroit school systems. And because of that, there's something that's maybe a public health issue that's causing crime by not preparing people properly for life and the decisions that need to be made to avoid crime. Again, they go into cigarette smoking and all kinds of stuff like that. Look, that's really not what this class is about. It's crime prevention, so I'm trying to kind of keep it a little more focused on crime. Um, and then we get into tertiary, which is basically a health problem after it has begun. So that one's more like, hey, you have lung cancer because you smoke. Well, now you're going to the doctor, and he or she is providing some sort of treatment for your lung cancer. That would be a tertiary prevention. It's kind of after the problem's already set in. So how would we take this over into the crime problem? Well, you already robbed somebody. Now, how are we going to fix your tendency for criminality after you've already been robbed? And that, like, it oftentimes can have to do with the court system or the correction system, excuse me, or actually both. So that's an important one too. If our true goal here is to eliminate crime, right, or lower it as much as we possibly can, we really need to start thinking whether throwing people into the Iron Bar Hotel really has the effect that we hope it does on crime. And what we learn, and we will learn in this class, is that it really doesn't. Or actually, you learned last chapter that it really doesn't. You can't just lock them all up and throw away the key, because it doesn't have the effect that we would hope that it does, or we thought that it would. Maybe in the 90s, 80s, war on drugs and three strikes laws. So now it's got us into another predicament where budgetarily, it's unbelievable how much that costs us, and we're not even getting a return on that significant investment into corrections. So, or at least is enough of a return. So now, studying crime prevention. I don't know if any of you have been through research methods yet. I would hope that you eventually will, but again, as undergrads, you may or may not necessarily have to take a research methods class. If this is the only thing that you have that's close to that, read this part of the book, read this part of the chapter, and really try to understand it. If you have any questions, tune in on that Zoom meeting if you can, and if you still, for whatever reason, can't tune into the Zoom meeting or don't get an opportunity to ask the questions, shoot me an email, because this is something really important for you to understand. Remember, you're in this class and you are becoming educated on topics that have to do obviously with criminal justice, but as you start to look deeper into crime prevention, these are things that if you watch the news, you will see talk about criminal justice reform, correction system reform, and often the people who speak on these topics are not educated. They may have watched a YouTube video or read one article that kind of favored their opinion, but they don't understand the nuts and bolts of it the way that you will if you read this and understand this. So in any academic study, okay, you're going to have variables. These are basic components. There's an independent and dependent variable. All right. Typically you're counting or measuring one of the two or both, and you're saying that I'm not going to get too deep into this because this is almost a class unto itself, but I'm just going to give you the Reader's Digest version, okay? If I wanted to study homicide and the causes of homicide, if I said, man, Lorraine is having the biggest, or BGSU is having a huge homicide problem, criminal homicide, what's causing it? Well, I'm going to look at two variables, and I'm going to say, well, obviously one is homicides, the number of homicides. How many of these homicides take place in the summertime? How many of them take place in the wintertime? And I'm going to look and go, whoa, there is a huge discrepancy here. 20 of the homicides took place in the summertime, 5 in the wintertime. So should I conclude that summertime is an independent variable? It doesn't need homicides to happen in order for there to be summer. But the way that my study is set up, if that's the independent variable, right? It's independent, then the dependent variable will be homicides. So if you're looking at summertime, you're going to have higher homicides. Homicides vary, variable, very clever. Homicides vary depending on something else that's independent. The independent is the season. The number of homicides is dependent on what time of year it is or what season it is. Now, that is a very simplified version. I would urge you all to read this well, um, because again, I don't want to delve too deeply in this, and I want to save some stuff for the Zoom meeting too. Um, but either way, read this, understand it, and if you have questions, reach out to me. As we get into identifying and understanding what that means between our independent, dependent variables, um, and there are more variables, we can start to understand research. And this is why, again, when you talk about these topics, when you talk about crime prevention with somebody from blank news agency who tries to tell you that, well, if we just did this, there would be a super low crime amount. Well, oftentimes news agencies say things that are very emotional. Obviously, we can look and see the drastic contrast between two different news agencies who report the same story. And what the reasoning behind that is one of them caters to people who feel this way, so they need to create fear. One of them caters to people who feel this way, so they need to create anger, right? Fear and anger are emotions. And the wording that is used and the way that a story is portrayed oftentimes can elicit those emotions that their loyal followers love. You know, they appreciate that this news agency caters to me. I feel this way, and then they double down on it. And as human beings, that's natural. It's not to say anything bad or good. You know, it's natural. I watch comedies because I like to laugh. So I'm going to tune into a comedy channel rather than a horror channel. It's the same idea. Not apples to apples, but hopefully that helps a little bit with an understanding. We get a little deeper here. I'm going to try to, there we go. All right. Survey research. When you guys understand this, you're not going to take that bait, and you're going to be able to call people out on, look, you're saying something that's quite emotional, but it's not factual or it's not logical. It's probably even a better way to say it. We get into things like survey research. There's a billion different types of surveys. Actually, there's a few different types of surveys. I'm being a little bit over the top there. You'll see here in your reading, they go over some of the main ones: telephone surveys, face-to-face surveys, mail surveys, internet surveys, which are awesome. These things are important because the people who take part in them are called respondents. And oftentimes, the data, the responses that you get from each of those respondents is data. That's your raw data, or that's your data that you're going to use to either come to a realization or prove a point. And it just depends on what kind of study you're conducting or what kind of study you're consuming, right? You're reading these studies to hopefully gain an understanding. And as you do, it helps to know how they came to the conclusion that they came to, right? So this is part of like methodology. If you ever read a book or a study that has a section that says methodology, well, methodology is a nice way to say how we found out what we found out. And oftentimes this is what can be attacked if somebody says that all cops are bad. And they say, well, we have an academic study that proves all cops are bad. I say, whoa, that would put me back on my heels a little bit. I'll say, let's check this out. I'd read that study. You know, I would consume that research, but I'd look at their methodology and say, how the heck did you come to this conclusion? What did you measure? And they'd say, well, every cop that wears boots and cuts his hair short or her hair short is bad. And we found that 99% of them cut their hair short and wear boots, so they're bad. I'd say, well, you're right, but your methodology is screwed up. Um, I understand that your research is valid. Your findings that 99% of officers cut their hair short. You're right. You're correct. But I disagree with your methodology. I disagree with how you came to those conclusions. Um, Data, interpretation, things like that, all have to do with survey research. There's other ways to gather data. Observations. I can sit in the park and watch how many people walk by with a red shirt. That's another type of gathering data. I mark it down. Okay, from noon until 4 o'clock, 50 people walk by with red shirts out of 150. Um, so the importance of all of these things, there are some pretty valid and generally accepted forms of data gathering that are done for us often. And some of those are you'll definitely hear this if you haven't already, the National Crime Victimization Survey, all right, NCVS. Super important source of data because it's well vetted, um, and often we try to find things that stick out on a report like that or on a data report from that. Say, whoa, you know, looks like homicides are way up, or people who have been victimized are claiming that there's a violent action associated with most of their crime. So we have a violence problem, right? We can start to deduct certain things. Another thing is the Uniform Crime Report, UCR, um, and NIBRS, National Incident Based Reporting System. These are not necessarily here in your book, but these are all. Well, so here's Uniform Crime Reports. Excuse me. Um, we call it UCR, but again, these are all forms that comes off of people who have reported things to the police, uniform crime reports. Whereas the National Victim Survey is actually a survey that's uh, conducted by the government, and even if the people haven't reported this crime to the police or to the law enforcement agency, um, they can often find that, wow, that's helpful because we can say only 50% of people are reporting crimes that happen to them, or 12%, whatever the case may be. So we can measure the discrepancy between the amount of reported homicides and the amount of homicides, or excuse me, homicide is a bad one. Those get highly reported. Um, but like if somebody digs through your car and steals 50 cents that you were going to use for the turnpike, they didn't break any windows. You didn't lock your doors. You may not call the police. But that doesn't mean that thefts are not taking place. There's the value of these right here. This helps us understand the actual crime problems. We will never fully know for sure unless we interviewed everybody in the world or in the country. We're not going to do that. So we do our best. And the reason that we rely on these are because their sampling and everything is done correctly to where we can generalize the answers to the population of the United States. So these are not sent to every single person in the U.S., the National Crime Victim Survey. They're sent to, I believe, 10,000 people. Um, don't quote me on that. But they're done in a way to where these answers can be generalized to the 300 million people that live in the United States. So if there's a 5% claim that you are the victim of a theft out of that 10,000 person sample, then they generalize that to the 300 million person sample, and 5% of that, which my math majors out there will know, I certainly am not going to do the mental math, but they can get an idea that this many people throughout the United States are victims of theft per year. So super, super valuable when you start talking about how we're going to be attacking the crime problem. Causal order, remember that association doesn't always equal causation. So in my example, and we're going to breeze past this section, but in my example of hot weather, warm weather, summertime causing murders, there's a famous, and you'll read it in here. You could study that there's a relationship or an association between ice cream sales and murder rates. What do I mean by that? As ice cream sales increase, murder rates increase, and that's factual. I mean, it's a fair finding, right? But the reason why is because there is an actual, uh, well, actually, there's a third not associated, or excuse me, a third common variable that affects both of them. And what that means is hot weather increases ice cream sales. Okay, hot weather also has people gathered in populated areas, concerts, parties, things like that. They're all outside to stay up late. Um, so that also tends to have an increase on murders, conflict, fights, assaults. But that doesn't mean that ice cream causes murders. And but if you were to do a study on that, you could find that wow, ice cream and murders are positively associated, meaning are related, correlated, excuse me. When one goes up, the other goes up. Yeah, but that's because of the hot weather. It's not because of ice cream. So, yeah, fascinating section here. Be sure to read that, okay? And that's kind of what that addresses. It addresses a few more things, but the causal order problem is a big deal. It's the chicken or the egg idea. It basically says there's a way to find out whether this is caused by this or whether they both are happening because of something else. Think of ice cream and murders. Thank me. Um, Reciprocal relationship. Yeah, these are things that are important to know. Read it. Try to get an understanding, but don't commit this to memory yet. You're going to deal with these a lot in the study of criminal justice. And it's great to have already known what they were, but this is not a research methods class. So we're not going to delve on that. Understand what they are, understand why they're important, some of the different methods here, longitudinal surveys, cross-sectional surveys. These are great. But with that being said, don't necessarily go bonkers over those, okay? Just read them. We'll get repetition with those, all right? Spuriousness, that's basically the antecedent variable that causes. So spuriousness means that, here we go right here, look at that. Oh. As you probably realize, the ice cream rate is actually a spurious or misleading association because we have not taken into account the effects of an important antecedent variable, the outside temperature. So spuriousness is caused by an antecedent variable. In our example of murders and ice cream, the antecedent variable would be summertime. So the finding that ice cream causes murders would be a spurious finding. Hope that helps understand it. But again, read that. Read that thinking, with that in your head, and you'll hopefully really be able to make more sense of that and understand that. Because again, down the road, it's not going to be as obvious. So it's important that you understand, hey, you got to protect against some of these spurious findings or misleading findings. Qualitative and quantitative research. Boy, this really is research methods based. Qualitative, you probably have heard of these things before. I am not going to drill these into your head because it's not necessarily, it's a part of crime prevention, but it's not even that important for you to know for crime prevention. You will 100% need to know this if you go on for your master's. You'll probably need to know it in your undergrad. I would think that you would, because these are important terms, just generally, in the study of criminal justice. So read that. There's a difference between qualitative and quantitative research. These are two different types of research that often are used to prove a point or to gather data. And again, a qualitative research can be done by like observing people. Quantitative research typically is like a measurement, body weight, age, things like that, height. These are what color shirt are you wearing in the park, how many people have been victimized, that kind of deal. So we get into experimental research. These are good, but again, read it. Make sense of it. If there's any questions, certainly send me an email. This is important for where we're going, but I don't want you to spend too much time on this, okay? Read it, learn it, and then move on because we're going to be applying it. And I think that when we apply it, it will make way more sense than if I sit here on a video that's already a little overdue trying to explain this to you. Like I said, these can be classes in their own. Recidivism, that's important. It means repeat offending. Very simple. Recidivist is a person who offends, repeatedly. A recidivism is repeat offending. Okay? So when we talk about recidivism rates, we got a guy for burglary. We're trying to eliminate recidivism, meaning when he gets out or she gets out, a guy for burglary, when he gets out, he doesn't commit another burglary. He doesn't recidivate. All right? Evaluation research. That's good because it does it. It assesses the effectiveness of a policy or a program. So it essentially says it's the judge as to whether or not this, that, or the other is something that really truly has a good effect on what you're trying to do. So if your aim with a program or a policy is to decrease the amount of alcohol consumption by college students. I know none of you drink, but if you did, and there were a program that was designed to lower the rates of college students, well, first you'd need to have some sort of a survey or some sort of data that would tell you how prevalent alcohol consumption among college students is. Then you would implement a program that was designed to take one piece of that triangle away that hopefully will cause those rates to lower, dramatically. The evaluation research would be something that you would do to say, after a while, you'd say, does this or doesn't this work? Is this having the effect that we hope it has? So another very important part of research. I'm not going to get into the conclusion because like any academic journal or writing or book, the introduction is they say, this is what we're going to tell you about. The body is when they tell you about it. And then the conclusion is we tell you what we told you about. So we're not going to get into that because you can just rewind. Summaries, these are good to read just to hammer home certain points. Key terms are here. Know what they are. But again, your open book tests and everything like that is something that you'll be able to use next year. I want you to learn through repetition rather than committing it to memory through just aimlessly drilling it through your heads. Now, let's see here. We are going to go to chapter 3. But unfortunately, let's see here. Stage. Okay, I'm back. So it took me a second, but I had to find my chapter 3 stuff here. So again, following along with the book here, this one's not a PDF, so it's a little less user-friendly. But with that being said, we're going to blow right through chapter 3 as well. Again, a brief touch. Sorry this one's taking so long, but there was a little that I had to explain to you before. Preview of the discussion. I'm going to get into that. Let's just get into the discussion. Biological factors then and now. Okay, so we're talking about crime factors. What increases the likelihood that crime could or will happen? So a long time ago, they used to think that the human skull or the size or shape of it had something to do with a biological factor in crime or criminality. So what that means is they thought for sure that because we can measure the size of or shapes of people's physiological attributes, okay, whatever it was, sometimes they thought it was the size of your nose or whatever, but they associated that with, wow, all the people who have committed crimes or people who are in jail seem to have this a higher likelihood of whatever, a large nose or something, their eyebrows being spaced farther apart. This has all been debunked. Okay, this is not necessarily something that causes a propensity um, to criminality. However, there are some things biologically that can, and we kind of touched on them a little bit in the last chapter as well, with regards to things like diminished cognition, mental functioning, decision-making skills, an increase in aggression, again, because of, either poor nutrition or even physical abuse sometimes, or psychological abuse. As your as children grow and develop, even the situational things like being locked in a cage can have a psychological effect on these kids that can cause them not to develop like a normal kid will. Um, this has to do with the chemicals, and we're not gonna get too deep into this. Don't worry. But this has to do with like the chemicals in your brain when you're happy and you laugh. Your brain develops in a certain way. Um, but if you never laugh, or if you never say "I love you" to a mom or dad, or have that affection shown from you from a parent, certain chemicals don't fire off like that, and because of that, it can have an effect. And so certainly stress creates hormonal releases. There's just a lot of different examples. This is actually pretty fascinating, and I would suggest that you read this, okay? Um, because it's actually pretty cool, and it will come into play when we start talking about crime prevention, the practices of it anyway. So we're gonna kind of blow past this again because there's not enough time for me to really teach you these ideas. You just have to read them. Cognitive and neurological development. I kind of already keyed. That's what I was talking about. I would say read that for further because it's really interesting and it can have an effect when you start talking about decreasing crime. Whether you say, hey man, we need to have parenting programs so that parents can be better with kids, be a better parent with their kids, break the cycle that they didn't have when they grew up because it's this important for all of society, right? If that kid grows up and is a burglar or a murderer, man, we need to do what we can now as society to stop that from happening. Um, so that it's a pretty fascinating argument. But definitely read that. Prenatal and maternal problems and fetal development. We talked about this already. Read that. Um, I don't mean to be ponying off any of the job of an instructor onto you guys, but here's the thing: I will drone on and on and on about this when really, quite honestly, they put it into a good perspective and it's pretty concise, meaning that the space that they use to explain these factors is minimal to get the maximum understanding. I feel like I'll only cloud this up, but if you have questions, again, I can I can then delve a little deeper into one of the specifics that you have a question about. Um, Genetics and crime. That one is an interesting one. Because they're talking about DNA, and if your dad was a murderer, that you're going to be more prone to be a murderer. But the thing that's kind of interesting about that is there are two different kind of trains of thought. Is it genetics? Is it nature or is it nurture? Okay. Your dad was abused when he was younger by his dad, and because of that, he grew up very aggressive and he was quick to fight. Well, he also abused you the way that he was abused, and because of that, you grew up. So now that's a nurture deal, right? The other side of it is genetics. Okay, he had an underdeveloped hypothalamus or whatever part of his brain that causes him to be more aggressive, as do you as well, causes you to be more aggressive. So pretty fascinating argument. They don't go too deep into that, but I think that that's something that you will A, find fascinating, and B, again, is important when we start talking about how we want to lower crime, how we want to prevent crime. Twin studies are awesome. They study, obviously, twins because these are people who have the same genetics, right? Twins, especially identical twins, have the same genetics. Yet and they have primarily the same upbringing, usually. Sometimes when they split, due to adoption or whatever, um, they can say they can now attribute things to nurture rather than nature. because hey, there's two people with identical genetics, and boom, one of them's a criminal and one of them's a whatever doctor, brain surgeon. So yeah, fascinating stuff. And again, these are meant to just give you an understanding that these kind of things are out there for when we start getting into the meat and potatoes of crime prevention. So, okay, molecular genetics. Barely say the word. Um, that is obviously a very, very scientific way. DNA testing uh, to see whether like strains of DNA or gene genetics again has a if we could predict. I mean, we're starting to get almost into like sci-fi stuff with this, but just like the person way in the past, uh, dang it, I'll tell you right now. Phrenology, Franz Joseph Gall. um, so he is a physician, just like when he claimed that uh, the size of your head was predictive of whether or not you were going to be a criminal or not. We start to get into molecular genetics, and it's a lot more scientific, obviously. We're not just saying, hey, you got a big head, so you're going to be a drug dealer. Um, no, instead, molecular genetics is more based around, hey, we're noticing a certain genetic trait that is shared by people who have diminished empathy, right? Like, you don't feel sorry for the people you victimized. Um, they can actually see that and say, this is a kid, even as a baby, this is a kid that we're going to need to be very careful with or um, really, really um, expose this kid to programming that's meant to help him develop this part of his brain or this part of his psyche that will prevent him from causing crimes or committing crimes, excuse me. Um, as intriguing as they are, this is an important part. They do not really lend themselves to crime prevention strategies. Okay, so we're not going in and saying, "Hey, give me that kid's DNA and genetic profile," and saying, yeah, he's going to be going to this school and she's going to be going to that school. No, it's not quite there yet. It's a fascinating field, and it may someday actually be something that is used to direct programming. But as of right now, we are not going down that road. Testosterone, male hormone, it has been implicated as an aggressive factor or a factor in aggressive and criminal behavior. Um, they start getting into like males commit more crimes than females. They're right, but again, is it because of testosterone, or is there some tertiary, or is there some antecedent variable that is the reason behind that? That's still up for debate, and I think that honestly, what if we did find that testosterone was a cause? Does that mean that we're going to start giving all males testosterone blockers? Males who are naturally higher in testosterone, we're going to give them testosterone blockers? I don't, I don't know that we'll ever get to that point. It's interesting again. It's futuristic in a way, but I don't think that we're going to really go down that road. For right now, certainly not. So you can read the little summary here for biology and crime prevention. We're not going to read verbatim what they write. Psychological factors are mental illness and personality traits that can lead to criminality or that can be identified and associated with a likelihood of criminality. Um, in a recent national survey, I thought that was interesting. 46% of Americans agreed that people with serious mental illness are by far more dangerous than the general population, which is kind of interesting because how do 46% of Americans even know what serious mental illness is? Yeah, again, we get into methodology, but regardless, mental illness in prison and jail inmates. Um, this is pretty. This is really interesting. Um, So again, another great source of statistics is the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Um, they are the ones who vet prisoners as they're admitted, so you can see things like age, race. I think religion is even in there, um, though they don't have to answer that. But as they book people in, and they're inputting all these things into a computer, this goes somewhere, and it goes to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, so that we can start to break down what our prisoners look like, the crime that they're associated with, and we can really do some interesting observations uh, by saying, hey, this could be associated with murders. This could be associated with robbers, drug users, drug dealers, things like that. But like anything, it can be flawed as well. It's not 100%, but it's interesting. Um, they go basically deep into how a high percent of prisoners have mental health problems, um, which is disappointing. You know, again, we're in the United States, we should have the ability to be treated for things like that, especially when if they're in prison, then they've harmed somebody, right? Whether they've harmed society or they've harmed a victim. So if we know as society that that person is harmful and that they also suffer from mental illness, that's a pretty important groundbreaking discovery to say maybe we should be taking mental health and illness a little more seriously in the country. So okay, rant over. Just to get your brains kind of thinking in that direction though. Population-based evidence. Okay, so again, our population typically is the United States of America. Whatever 300 million people that we have here now, somewhere around there, maybe more. Um, we try to look at how many people are mentally ill, you know, suffer from mental illness. How many people suffer from drug addiction? How many people are one of those factors that we talked about? Okay, nature, nurture, whatever it is that's causing criminality. We try to get an idea of how many people are walking around just because they haven't committed it yet. Maybe they never will, but they're still more prone to commit. And if so, you know, it helps us to have um, national population-based evidence. Final word on mental illness. I tell you what they spoke about. You can read that. Personality traits and crime. So this is pretty cool. Antisocial behavior among young children, adolescents, and adults. So they look at things like coldness, impulsivity, irritability, and suspiciousness. Okay, or trust issues as we know them. Um, but they can be measured by personality inventories. There's some great surveys that are out there by really, really smart people who that are designed and kind of generally accepted to say, hey, if they scored this on the personality assessment test or personality inventories survey, then we can take that as like a general standardized, hey, that is a person that suffers from mental illness. That is a person who does in fact have a high, an abnormally high level of impulsivity, right? Acting on impulse. So they go into the early studies. Some of those are not valid anymore. A lot of those are not valid really anymore. We've kind of come to an evolution where we've evolved to a state where now we can still attribute certain behaviors and actions and decision making processes to some of these personality disorders. Um, but again, it's more of a fascinating thing and it's more of something to get you thinking about how you want to prevent crime. Okay? Are these things that you want to address in your crime prevention efforts? Um, Cognitive processes and motivation. So rational choice and deterrence, okay? Right here, guys and girls, the rational choice theory. This is, when we talk about the crime triangle, we're assuming that bad guy or bad girl is making a rational choice, okay? This is one of the major theories in criminal justice, okay? Crime theories. And it basically says that anyone who's about to commit a crime has at least a second to think about it and say, I can react this way and I have a good opportunity of getting away with it. It's worth trying it and I have a reason to do it, right? So again, we're going back to that crime triangle, right? And we're talking about um, if this really is a rational choice, okay, not just any choice, but a rational one, meaning there's some form of logic used to come to this conclusion, then what we're saying is if we make logic suggest that, hey, it's not a good idea to do this by addressing one of those three parts of the crime triangle, then yeah, we can lower crime rates, and that's why the rational choice theory, Beccaria, you'll certainly learn about him if you haven't already. But he's one of the guys that really uh, brought this to light, and it's often a part of crime prevention. Can't say it is every time, but it's often a part of crime prevention. That basically you're trying to make rationality suggest that you shouldn't commit the crime, rather than rationality suggest that you should. Okay, so deterrence theory, another major one. Okay, deterrence theory is essentially we're going to punish this person to deter others from doing that. Um, that's an oversimplified way of doing it because again, these major theories here that we're talking about, rational choice, deterrence, these are things that you can almost major in them. That's how like deep they go. Um, so I'm trying to simplify it for you just to give you a general direct understanding. But this is a good example or a good definition though. Let's see here. Bang. It refers to the idea that the threat of arrest and punishment reduces the crime rate because potential offenders don't want to risk being arrested, convicted, incarcerated. Death penalty is a prime example of the deterrence theory. If I murder this guy because I don't like him, I might get killed. So that's going to deter me from even wanting to think about committing this crime, right? You're punished so severely. I mean, there's potentially not a worse punishment that you can have, I guess, than being executed. And that's the rationale behind the execution often is because, hey, if we say, boy, you murder this guy, you'll just be locked up for the rest of your life with three hots and a cot, that might not really deter people from wanting to make the decision to kill people. And that's one of the arguments. It's not the only argument, but that's one of the arguments used as to why the death penalty is necessary or warranted in certain situations. So definitely read on this. It's important. General and specific deterrence. General deterrence is essentially when people who didn't commit a crime, like all of society that watches this deterrence, they're going, ooh, I don't want to be that guy, right? I don't want to be that guy that just got nailed with 20 years in the slammer for a bar fight. Okay, that deters people from making foolish decisions in the bar. Specific deterrence means that once that guy goes and does that 20 years, he's gonna get out someday, or maybe he gets out early, right? Maybe he says, I'm gonna get paroled early. He gets paroled early, and somebody steps on his shoes in the club, and he says, "Man, I really don't want to go and do another 20 years. I'm gonna let it go." He has been deterred from committing that crime again, specifically him, because of the punishment that he received. Or again, the other guys, general deterrence, because of the punishment that that guy received, they're also not going to get involved in a bar fight. So, pretty interesting stuff, and it may or may not be a part of crime prevention. Uh, it may or may not be a part of your crime prevention approach. So, definitely read this section. I'm not going to go too deep into it because it's kind of like general. Um, but, and then obviously your conclusion and your summary and all the terms. Um, definitely read these guys. I picked this book because it doesn't kill you with too many pages each chapter. Okay, these pages are like 15 pages a chapter. You could probably blow through it in an hour and a half each chapter. You do one on Monday, you do one on Thursday. you should be in good shape. But read these because again, if you're going to get something out of this class, it's going to be the it's going to be the knowledge and the solid understanding that we create here. Um, Obviously, it is a 6 week course, so there's going to be work, and there's going to be a decent amount of work. But it's a 6 week course. You're getting credit for a 16-week class in 6 weeks. So bear with me. Because it's a 6 week course, we don't have a lot of time for makeup stuff. Get your work done on time. If you don't get your work done on time, I have to penalize you because I can imagine that there are people out there who are staying up late to get their work done. And if I were to just let them, wait till the last minute or even past the last minute and give them full credit, um, they're going to be upset. So get your work done. If you don't get it done, shoot me an email. Let me know. I'll probably penalize you a little bit of points because it's late, but it's certainly you can't afford to miss assignments in this class. Again, every assignment is super important, super heavily weighted, and yeah, get some points for it. I don't care if it's 5 days late. You might get penalized a little more heavily, but at least you're not taking a goose egg. Um, Other than that, this week you obviously have. I'm going to do another video for the expectations for this week, so don't worry about that. We covered chapters 2 and 3 in this. Went a little bit longer than I was hoping. I was hoping for maybe a half hour on each. We're at about an hour and 6 minutes, but we had a little bit to begin with. So, yeah, Wednesday, 7 p.m., we will look to do a Zoom. If you log on, great. If I don't have anybody logging on about 10 after, I'm going to log off because I'm not waiting around all night. If you need something before then, if you need something after then, call me. Again, this is an online class, so it's self-paced. You do it when you have a chance to do it, but obviously proactivity and staying ahead of the game is helpful. Other than that, good luck. Thank you all for being here. If there are any suggestions, if you say, Jake, I like the class, or Jake, I hate the class, would be a lot better if you did this, man, shoot me an email privately, please. Don't put me out there like that. But give me an email. Hey, man, this would be a lot cooler if you did this or if you did that. I'm always looking to give you guys the best experiences that I can. And the people who came before you actually said that videos like this would be beneficial. And I said, hell, you're right. So now I'm going to try to do that. And hopefully it's appreciated or hopefully it helps. But again, if you at any time think anything that could make this class better within reason, not juggling any torches or anything, but anything that you can do to, or any ideas you have to make this class better, shoot me an email. Till next time, be safe, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you all someday in the future. Take care.